Thanks to MPB for sponsoring this video.
Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and in this video I'll be comparing the quality of 3 popular Canon RF telephoto zooms, including extra results with teleconverters, or as Canon calls them, extenders. The star of this show is the latest RF 70-200mm f2.8LZ. When I initially reviewed this lens, it delivered impressive results, but we all wanted more still. In particular, how well did it work with the extenders? And for these longer effective focal lengths, just how did it compare directly against the RF 100-500? So I've retested the RF 70-200 2.8LZ, first in its standard range, and again fitted with the RF 1.4x extender, and again after that with the RF 2x extender. I then retested the RF 100-500 f4.5 to 7.1L at matching focal length to see how it compares, and since I had them to hand, I also tried it with the RF 1.4x extender to increase the reach to 700mm, and of course the RF 2x extender, which doubles it to 1000mm. Note the extenders only work on this lens between 300 and 500mm. And finally, for good measure, I've also included some tests with the original RF 70-200 2.8L to see how it compares. Remember, this original model employed an extending barrel to reduce its transportation size, but in turn this sadly rules out the use of extenders. As always, I've avoided shooting test charts at close range and instead compared all 3 lenses with a distant real-life subject, as this better represents how most of these lenses will be used, at least I think so. Now it is much harder to do, especially when you're making as many comparisons as I have for this video, but I think it's important to make the effort. I'm also concentrating on their sharpness with a distant subject to keep this video manageable in length, but if you're interested in their relative rendering, close-up performance, focusing speed, design and controls, please do check out my separate reviews of each lens.
Just before kicking off, it's important to note that these 3 zoom lenses represent the best that Canon currently makes, but if you can't stretch to their prices, there's some great deals on older EF models, especially on the used market. When I'm shopping for used camera gear, I head to mpb.com. For example, you could pick up the most recent Mark III EF 70-200 2.8L in light new condition at a comfortably lower price than a new RF version. Or how about the most recent EF 100-400 Mark II at around half that of an RF 100-500? These last EF lenses were great performers and adapt well to mirrorless cameras. I appreciate how MPB is very honest about the condition of their gear, showing clear photos from all sides, stating exactly what's included, and in stark contrast to marketplaces providing a 12-month warranty, as well as a full refund within 14 days if you're not happy. Or if you're committed to buying a new lens and need to raise some funds, how about selling any gear you don't use anymore to MPB? You don't need to create a listing, take any photos, or haggle with anyone. MPB will give you an instant quote, can arrange collection, and will pay you within a few days. So whether you're buying used gear or selling anything that you don't need anymore, check out mpb.com or using the link in the description. Right, on to those comparisons.
Okay, so on to my first test, and all of them were made with a Canon EOS R5 Mark II body. First, you're looking at the RF 70-200 2.8L at 70mm 2.8, and as always I've angled the view so that details run into the corners. All the test shots here were focused in the centre of the frame. Let's now zoom in for a closer look in the middle with the original 70-200 2.8L on the left and the newer Z version on the right, both at 70mm 2.8. Both are performing very well here right out of the gate, although the Z version on the right is a fraction crisper overall, and it's also showing fractionally higher contrast here. Closing them both one stop to f4 makes virtually no difference, proving that they're already performing near to or even at their best in the middle when wide open. So back to the f2.8 sample before heading into the far corner. Once again, I'll put the original RF 70-200 2.8 on the left and the newer Z version on the right. And remember, both here are at f2.8. Now though, there's a dramatic difference between my copies of the lenses on test, with the original on the left looking quite soft in the corner versus the Z on the right, which maintains its sharpness. Now this is due to a number of factors, one of which is the field flatness. Now the original 70-200 can be sharp in the corners if you focus there, but when focused in the middle of the frame you are going to notice softness in the corners at the largest apertures. In contrast, the newer Z version has a flatter field, allowing it to maintain sharp results across the frame regardless of where you focus and even at the largest apertures. Anyway, as I close down the aperture, the original model on the left gradually sharpens up in the corners, but the Z on the right remains in the lead, even at f5.6. So now for the view at 100mm, taken here with the original 70-200 2.8 at 100mm 2.8. So let's zoom in for a closer look in the middle, and as before place the original model on the left alongside the newer Z version to its right, both wide open at f2.8. But now we can also add the RF 100-500 at its shortest focal length of 100mm and its maximum aperture of f4.5. I've popped it on the far right. I'd say all three lenses are looking pretty similar in the middle here, at least at first glance. Pixel peepers may spot fractionally higher contrast and overall crispness from the 70-200 Z in the middle, but I wouldn't make a decision based on this alone as they are pretty close. But do remember the 100-500 is over a stop dimmer at this point, so let's now close the two 70-200s to f4, where I'd say they're enjoying a fractional boost in contrast. And now for all three at f5.6, again looking very similar here. So back to the f2.8 sample before heading into the far corner, and again you're looking at the original 70-200 at 100mm 2.8 on the left, the newer Z version at 100mm 2.8 in the middle, and the 100-500 at 100mm f4.5 on the right. Here again the original 70-200 is looking softer than the others, partly due to a less flat field. Meanwhile the Z version is crisp into the corners and the 100-500 is only fractionally behind it. Close the two 70-200s to f4 and the original does improve and there's additional gains for my sample at f5.6, but the Z remains ahead of it here and the 100-500 again not far behind that. So now for the view at 140mm, starting with the original 70-200 at 2.8, before zooming in for a close look in the middle. As before, you're looking at the original model on the left and the newer Z version in the middle, both at f2.8, while on the right is the 100-500 at 140mm f4.5. I'd say they're all looking pretty similar here in the middle of the frame, nice and crisp with lots of detail. Pixel peepers may notice fractionally higher contrast from the Z in the middle, and at f4 the original mostly catches up, while with them all at f5.6 there's little to tell between them. So back to the f2.8 sample before heading towards the far corner. As before, it's the original on the left, the Z in the middle, and the 100-500 on the right, showing similar characteristics to the previous tests. So the original 70-200 on the left is looking a little soft compared to the extra crisp Z in the middle, and the 100-500 just a little bit behind the leader. Close the two 70-200s to f4 and the original begins to sharpen up, improving further at f5.6, but here the 100-500 is still looking better and the Z is looking best of all. So next for the 70-200s at the long end of their range, at least without the help of extenders. So you're looking at the original 70-200 at 202.8. Let's take a close look in the middle of the frame, as usual with the original on the left, the Z in the middle, both at f2.8, and the 100-500 on the right at 200mm f5 this time, because that's the maximum aperture for that lens at this focal length. Here I'd say the original 70-200 on the left is looking a tad softer than the Z in the middle, and indeed when the Z lens came out, Canon claimed that it was improved at the long end of the range. I'd also say the 100-500 is looking better than the original 70-200 at this point, albeit with the Z still in the lead. As you close the aperture, the original zoom begins to crispen up though, and by f5.6 there's little to tell them apart. So back to the 2.8 sample before heading into the far corner. Again you have the original 70-200 on the left, the Z version in the middle, and the 100-500 on the right. As before, the original lens becomes softer in the corners at the maximum aperture, with the 100-500 on the right looking crisper, and again the Z best of all in the middle. Close their apertures down and the original 70-200 will catch up with the 100-500, but again the Z remains crisper than both. Now I'm going to be moving on to extenders next, so the original 70-200 f2.8L is going to bow out at this point. And looking at the results so far, this original model roughly matched the latest one in the middle of the frame, but became softer in the corners, at least when focused in the middle. Again, this is partly down to a less flat field, and there's also the fact that my test sample was an older press model that had seen more action than the other two lenses. But there's also no denying the Z version is simply better corrected, and when you place magnified crops side by side you're going to really notice the difference. Either way, this video was made mostly to test the new Z version with extenders, especially when compared to the 100 to 500, so let's now get on with that part of the review. So first, here's a test at 100mm. This shot was taken with the Z lens at 100mm 2.8, so let's take a close look in the middle and place it on the left. Now in the middle is the same lens, but this time fitted with the RF 1.4x extender and adjusted back to 70mm in order to match the field of view. So this means it's operating at f4 here, and on the right is the 100 to 500 at the start of its range, so 100mm 4.5. I'd say they're all looking pretty similar in the middle here, which bodes well for the resolving power of the Z when fitted with an extender, at least the 1.4x seen here. Close the plain Z lens on the left to f4 though, and I'd say it enjoys a small boost in contrast and ultimate crispness, but they're still looking close. And with them all closed to f5.6, there's minor improvements to be had, but again, the Z is fractionally ahead. So let's return to the f2.8 sample and head into the far corners. You're looking at the plain Z lens here on the left at 100mm 2.8, the same lens with the 1.4x extender in the middle, working at 100mm f4, and finally the 100 to 500 on the right at 100mm 4.5. Again, all three are looking very similar here, although pixel peepers may notice the 100 to 500 looking a fraction less crisp than the Z without an extender, but similar when fitted with an extender. Meanwhile, close the plain Z to f4 and it enjoys a small lead. Okay, so now for a comparison at 280mm, seen here with the Z lens at 200mm and fitted with a 1.4x extender, so working at f4. Let's zoom in for a closer look, placing this combination on the left and comparing it to the 100 to 500 at 280mm on the right, where it's operating at f5.6. Again, a very close result at their maximum apertures, but if you really examine the fine details, you may notice the Z lens on the left is ever so slightly sharper. It's really minor and to all intents and purposes I'd call it a draw, but the important fact is the Z is matching or even slightly outperforming the 100 to 500 at this focal length when using an extender and still operating one stop faster. Close the Z lens one stop to work at f5.6 and the difference becomes more obvious. Meanwhile, the 100 to 500 will enjoy a mild boost to f8. So back to the Z lens and extender at f4 here, before heading into the far corner. Again, I'll keep this result on the left and compare it against the 100 to 500 corner on the right. Again, I'd say a similar result to the middle, with both delivering impressively good detail in the corners, but the Z delivering slightly higher contrast and crispness, especially if you close it to a matching aperture of f5.6. Okay, now for a three-way test at 140mm, starting here with the 70 to 200Z at 140mm f2.8. Let's take a close look in the middle, placing the plain Z on the left at 140mm 2.8, alongside the same lens fitted with the 2x extender, and zoom back to 70mm to deliver the same field of view. So here the lens is working at 140mm and f5.6. And finally we have the RF 100 to 500 on the right, zoomed to 140mm, where its maximum aperture is f4.5. At first glance they're looking similar in the middle, although upon closer inspection you'll see the plain Z lens on the left is a tad crisper with slightly higher contrast than the same coverage with the extender to its right. Plus it's 2 stops brighter too. But revealingly the 100 to 500 is looking pretty close to the Z lens when that is fitted with a 2x extender and when both are capturing an effective 140mm field of view. Meanwhile, with them all at f5.6, the 100 to 500 does improve a little and the plain Z unsurprisingly takes a more decisive lead. So back to the f2.8 sample from the plain lens before heading into the far corner. Here you'll see a repeat, where the plain Z lens on the left is looking crisper and slightly more contrasty than the other two, even though it's operating at a larger maximum aperture. But again, the equally important story is how the 100 to 500 on the right is very close to the Z lens when that is fitted with a 2x extender. Now let's push on to what you really wanted to see, a head-to-head at 400mm, starting here with the 70 to 200Z at 200mm and fitted with the RF 2x extender. So here it's working at 400mm f5.6. Let's take a closer look with the Z lens on the left and the 100 to 500 on the right at 400mm, where its maximum aperture becomes f6.3, so it's actually 1/3 of a stop dimmer. Side by side, they're looking very close in sharpness and contrast, and while the 100-500 is arguably a fraction crisper in some details, I'd be perfectly happy with either. The important point here is the 70-200Z with a 2x extender is essentially matching the quality of the 100-500 when both are set to 400mm, and doing so with a slightly brighter aperture too. And here they both are close to f8, enjoying fractional improvements, but again looking similar. So now back to the Z sample at f5.6 before heading into the far corner. Here the Z and extended combination on the left isn't quite as sharp as the 100-500 on the right at their maximum apertures. So let's close them both to f8 again, where the Z lens improves a little, but the 100-500 on the right remains ahead. So here we're seeing a small benefit to the 100-500 overall, but in the middle, where most of your subjects are going to be, it is much closer. Now from this point on, it's a one-horse race, with the 100-500 extending further, and with the added opportunities of using extenders. So here it is at 500mm, where the maximum aperture has dimmed to f7.1. Let's have a closer look, although as the view is getting very tight now, I'm just going to concentrate on the familiar details from previous comparisons. Here I'd say the lens is delivering a decent degree of detail, and while it lacks the biting contrast of the Z lens, it is reaching further without the need to crop or fit any extenders. But how about with extenders? Here's the view from the 100-500 at 500mm and fitted with the RF 1.4x extender, where it becomes 700mm f10. Taking a close look at the detail shows it managing to keep up with the demands of the extender, delivering more detail than I could see at 500mm, but with a similar overall crispness. And finally with the 100-500 at 500mm, but this time fitted with the RF 2x extender, which means it's operating at 1000mm f14. And taking a closer look at the same area again shows genuinely more detail than before, most notably in the texture of the metal bracket for the light. This is out-resolving what the lens was delivering at 500mm without the extender. To reinforce this point, here's the same object with the lens at 500mm, with the plain lens on the left, with the 1.4x extender in the middle, and with the 2x extender on the right. Now if I crop those first two samples to match the 1000mm field of view of the third, and therefore delivering the same subject size, you'll really see the difference, with the lens genuinely able to deliver greater resolution with the extenders. That's pretty interesting, so let's repeat that test, but now with the 70-200 2.8L Z lens at 200mm. So on the left, the lens by itself, in the middle with a 1.4x extender, and on the right with a 2x extender. And now cropping the first two samples to match the 400mm field of view and subject magnification, where again you'll see how the lens has resolution to spare when using extenders. Of course, this has all been with static subjects, so as I wrap up this review, here are some sequences of birds in flight taken with the 70-200 Z lens fitted with the extenders. If you're a Canon owner wanting to shoot at around 400mm, the question has always been whether to get, say, a 70-200 with an extender, or a zoom that's around the 100-400 range. The former will give you the chance to start brighter, but the latter should in theory be better optimised for the longer reach, while also being more convenient too. In the native RF catalogue for EOS R cameras, it boils down to using the RF 70-200 2.8LZ versus the RF 100-500 f4.5 to 7.1. The former is the current 70-200 in the series that's compatible with extenders throughout its range, while the latter can just reach even further natively. Price-wise, the 70-200Z and 100-500 were actually quite similar in the US at the time I made this video, but tariffs mean anything could happen. In the UK, the 100-500 was cheaper, but don't forget, in order to extend the reach of the 70-200, you're also going to need to invest $400 to $600 or pounds on one of the RF extenders. So that route is probably going to work out more expensive. In terms of size, these lenses aren't a world apart, and while the 70-200 is a few mil shorter and narrower, it won't make that much difference in a bag. Note the 100-500 barrel does become quite a bit longer when zoomed in though, and requires a more purposeful twist to operate. Weight-wise, you're looking at 1.12 kilograms for the 70-200 versus 1.53 kilograms for the 100-500, so it's quite a bit heavier. But again, remember to factor in an extra 225 grams and 20mm in length if you're using the 1.4x extender, or an extra 340 grams and 40mm in length for the 2x model. So again, they're ending up roughly similar. In terms of flexibility, there's pros and cons to both approaches. The 70-200 sports a much brighter aperture in its native range, and it remains constant with or without extenders. But if you regularly want to shoot it at both 70 and 400mm, you're going to need to keep taking the extender on or off, which can be inconvenient or even mean missing a shot. In contrast, the 100-500 gives you that longer range with a simple twist to the zoom ring, albeit extending the barrel versus the internal zoom of the 70-200Z. It'll also reach longer than the 70-200Z even when you fitted that with a 2x extender, and of course you could always fit it with an extender to reach even further still. In fact, with a 2x extender giving you 1000mm, the 400 maximum of the 70-200 just pales in comparison. But the aperture on this lens is variable and much dimmer, especially with an extender fitted. How about the quality though? In my tests I showed both lenses actually have resolution to spare and can genuinely deliver more detail with extenders than without. Overall, the 70-200Z delivered the standout performance here, consistently crisper and higher contrast, especially in the middle of the frame where your subjects are likely to be. And while it lost a little contrast with the extenders when wide open, it still essentially matched the 100-500 at the same effective coverage. It's an extremely good lens. Price aside, I'd say the decision between them is whether you desire f2.8 across at least some of the range, or the chance to reach further than 400mm. If you want the convenience of reaching 500mm with the native range, then obviously the 100-500 is going to be best for you, while also giving you the chance to reach up to 1000mm with respectable results. If you're happy with 400mm as a maximum though, I'd personally get the 70-200Z as it's going to be crisper and much brighter in the native range, and essentially match the quality between 200 and 400mm when using extenders. Sure, it's more expensive and less convenient, but the results just speak for themselves.
That's my view anyway. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, especially if you have one of the lenses that I've tested in this video. Thanks for watching, and thanks also to MPB for sponsoring this video. If you've got any used camera gear to buy, sell or trade, check them out at mpb.com or using the links in the description. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.